all know the Flight Centre brand, and I think we're all very proud, I suppose, in a lot of ways of the Flight Centre brand, seeing it's an Australian one. I don't actually realise how big the whole group is and the size and scale. So maybe for a bit of context, can you give us a bit of an idea of the leisure group that it's part of and the size and scale, and I guess where Flight Centre fits into that?
Today, we're a $24 billion organisation. We have 30 brands around the world. Today we have 14,000 employees, a market cap of just under $5 billion, a share price coming out of the pandemic of $22.
Even given the success, there was a dark period for all of us and Flight Centre as well during COVID. And I think during pre, we called it exactly that, a very dark period. You started in your now current role during that same time as well. So I'd imagine there'd be a few lessons learned, a few challenges gone through that you might be able to share with us that we can learn from as well.
Yeah, Andre, and as I was saying to you, is that we actually forget quite quickly about that dark period. It actually was quite traumatic when you actually had to go back and relive that period. But let's go back to March 2020. That's where all hell broke loose for us in the travel industry. All of a sudden, borders started to close, airlines were grounded, government restrictions were put in place. We as an executive team globally thought this was a 2-3 week problem. We'd all be back in the office very, very quickly. And it ended up being a nearly short of a 4-year problem. What we also realized in April is that we don't have a lot of money left in the bank to see us through. We had about $1 billion worth of cash in the bank. So at that time, pre-March 2020, you would have thought that's a good number. But when you've got a cost base of about $235 million per month operating cost base around the world, and your income dries up in hours and days, your financial runway is short. So we had less than 3 months to survive. That's April. May 2020. Now, this sort of, in most business books, that would be 3 years worth of work. But I'm telling you, this is 3 months. In May of 2020, we managed to raise 700 million capital through investment, traditional and retail investors. And we managed to give ourselves another financial runway of about 12 months by moving our cost base from 235 million down to 65 million within 6 weeks. So what we had to do is we formed a task force that consisted of every global executive around the world. We had calls twice daily, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, no matter where you were. We were tasked with basically going, cut your costs by basically 2/3, if not even more. So I was running South Africa at the time, and the reality in South Africa was there was no, sort of FOLO schemes and, sort of these schemes to look after your people the way governments in first world countries could do that. So I fought very hard to make sure we kept as many of our people on the payroll as possible, because once you're out of a job in South Africa, there's a good chance it affects 10 to 15 people because the way the socioeconomic situation is in South Africa. However, we went down from 235 million down to 65 million within 6 weeks. We went from 1,400 global shops around the world down to 400. We went from 24,000 employees globally down to 6,000. We protected our most senior, when I say protected, we ring-fenced our most senior leadership team that will take us through the pandemic. And then when we get out of the pandemic, able to regrow the business. All senior executives' salaries and wages were cut by 50%, and that was the case for the next 4 years. We then sat in hibernation mode whilst we set a 65 million cost base, whilst we're still paying out customer refunds. So there were customer refunds across corporate and leisure. That equated to about $2 billion. And we honored every single refund. I know, particularly in Australia, we were in the press for a lot of the wrong reasons initially. But quite simply, we just didn't have the money in order to refund. So there was a balance of survival, and then how do you rebuild the business? So we're proud of the fact that we refunded, the refunds, $2 billion globally. We sat through a hibernation period. And that hibernation period, probably about 3-4% of our overall income came through, and that was expatriation flights and expatriation flights and expatriation flights. That was our only business. The furlough schemes and that certainly helped. We certainly think especially UK, New Zealand, Australia, and the US, it really did. It kept people employed. But it also was a short-lived moment of security, because once the furlough scheme had finished, we still had another 3 years of this pandemic to get through. So, like I say, 24,000 down to 6,000. We're very much a people business. It was an exceptionally dark period, but we're not alone. There were many other industries in the same boat, except if you were a pharmaceutical company, it was probably your best period. I know Scrooge talks passionately about this as well, is that one thing we do talk about as a company is let's never go back to the government making those decisions on our movement as individuals. But so dark period. But again, I look at it and I say during that period, especially in hibernation, we actually reinvented our ways. And I think this is the silver lining. We talk about never wasting a crisis. So make a crisis into something special, although it was devastating for a lot of our people. And the silver lining was we actually managed to fast forward a lot of our strategy. So pre-pandemic, Flight Centre, well-known brand globally, but there was probably a few opportunities to change. Number one, how do we significantly invest in technology was a big question mark. We needed board to agree to that. And during a time when you're making money, it's hard for the board to agree too much. And then the second one was we felt that we probably had a too large network of shops. And I talk about having a bloated network globally. So there was a moment in time there as well to say, okay, well, whatever we left with, let's retain the very best 400 or 500 shops that are world-class, that will see us through the regrowth period, and get out of those leases. Landlords were exceptional with us, and that's based on relationships. And I think that was based on Scrooge's relationships, Flight Centre's relationships, and, don't ever burn your bridges. Small businesses, small companies, we all know each other in Queensland, we know each other in Australia, and that really helped us. Landlords, gave us a 2-year reprieve on most leases, particularly those where we were staying in, and that helped. It helped with cash flow. But when I say we were on our knees, we were 2.5 months away from that's the end of Flight Centre. That's that dark period, and just thankful that we're back, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later, but we're back and we're humbled by it, and we'll never forget that. We talk about not going back to old ways. We talk about remembering muscle memory, and it's easy to go back to muscle memory. So where we are today, just to close up on this question, is we invested significantly now today in technology, which is good. Our business, less than 3% of our volume came from our online channels. To be fair, we didn't really have online channels. It was purely bricks and mortar and people. Today, nearly 20% of our volume comes from online. So there was significant investment in technology, which is good. And those shops that are back and open, which you see, we've now got 550 of those shops around the world. 90% are highly profitable. So we made the right decisions. But in some core markets like the UK and Canada, we obliterated the assets in order to survive as well. So Canada, we've only got 10 shops. UK, we've got 10 shops, and we're rebuilding. So Southern Hemisphere, actually, South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia has actually come out really, really strong. Northern Hemisphere is still strong, but a much smaller and I'd say a weaker offering that we have up in the north.